Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here at ECDPM this morning. We also have quite a few guests joining us online, so thanks for coming out on a Friday. I know that it's not everyone's favorite day to join for events. We're very glad to host this discussion this morning on secure, resilient, and open digital infrastructure. As some of you may know, we at ECDPM, we've been very much following the various discussions about digital sovereignty in recent months, and thinking about the tech stack, but thinking about it in terms of the potential for international partnerships across the tech stack as well, and about how we can reinforce our security and our resilience by engaging also with global partners. So we're very glad to be hosting this discussion on the paper, The European Way, that my colleague Gautam Kamath was involved in, together with Kai Zenner and around 30 other leading thinkers across Brussels. And this discussion will have a strong focus on the international dimension, because the paper does highlight the fact that the way forward, the European way, is not about being closed and being a protectionist entity, but rather about continuing to reinforce European digital sovereignty at the same time as continuing to engage with international partners. So without further ado, we have a packed session. So I'm going to hand over to Kai Zenner, is joining us online, and Gautam will also present in the room.
Hear me? Perfect. All right. Thank you all for being here. Kai, over to you.
Yes. Perfect. Also from my side, welcome, and thanks very much to the organizer for offering us the chance. It was already said, this whole project is basically driven by a group of digital experts, not only from Brussels, but also from Paris, from Berlin, from all across the European Union. Most of us know each other for many, many, many years. And we all had this feeling, okay, Europe could actually do, especially in the digital field, much better than it does if there would be stronger overall vision, a clear strategy, and also bolder reforms. And with everything that is happening right now, with Trump, with the Draghi report, and so on, we really felt now it's time to complement many of those reports that have been written with a really specific piece for the digital sector. Because we don't have a lot of time, I will go through my slides very, very fast. Gautam, maybe to the next one. This you have seen probably many, many times, either this graphic or similar ones. Most of us who are following the digital sector for many years have seen how it became worse and worse, even in the last 10 years when the European Union tried very strongly to push back. But at least when you look at those diagrams, it didn't really help. On the next slide, you also see an infographic from the European Court of Auditors that is showing many things, but also that when it comes to 5G, there is more and more dependency on non-European companies, which we will say again and again is not bad per se, but there is definitely an imbalance. Next slide. The European Union tried, and I said already 5G, and there were also a lot of other often very, very smart and useful initiatives. The Digital Decade, for example, that tried to accelerate our digital transformation. when it comes to cybersecurity, NIS2, Cyber Resilience Act, and so on and so on. So a lot of attempts to tackle this digital dependency, the fact that our companies are falling behind, the fact that there's imbalance in the digital single market, but of course also in the global digital market. But yeah, the problem was that it didn't really help, at least if you really look at the overall picture. A huge problem, and this was the reason why I did this blue wall that you saw in the previous slide, was that at the moment there are around 105 laws applicable, over 120 legislative initiatives planned, but they are often not really coherent. They often, for example, as many of you know, I worked very much on the AI Act. There was no majority and no willingness to add things like GDPR, like the Data Act, like energy efficiencies directive, and so on. And this is happening all the time, that laws are really created in work silos and not really having or getting included links to other pieces of legislation that are going in a similar direction. So a coherent overall strategy in our feeling is really missing. Of course, on top, there's also, and the Draghi report, many other reports were saying it, for many, many years, weak and inconsistent enforcement. There is this fact that the Commission is doing less and less let's say punishments for against member states that are not fulfilling their obligations, that are not matching the deadlines, and so on. I think everyone can understand it because of the political problems, because of certain national governments that do not make it easy for Brussels to say it simple. And of course, all of that is also happening in an environment of very, very different macroeconomics, of very strong geopolitical challenges. Going back again to the AI Act, when the AI Act has been developed, we were all thinking, okay, great, there is a strong alignment with the United States, with the UK. So in the end, even though we are doing something that is more specific in certain areas, there is so strong international cooperation that in the end, we will be able to streamline worldwide what we did here in Europe. Those things with the US government, with other geopolitical tensions, not only in the field of AI, are becoming extremely difficult. In the next slide, you see one thing that, however, all of us, all authors, wanted to underline very strongly, and I said it already at the beginning, it doesn't need to be that way. We in the European Union have a lot of strengths. You see it here in our infographic, just a short overview. Of course, our market size, our highly skilled workforce, rich history of innovation, of course, also our welfare system that is giving startup founders a kind of safety net if they are failing, and so on. So again, from, let's say, at least the basic elements that our digital economy can make use of, it should do actually much better. Because all of those problems, there is another push. You can go already to the next slide. For tax sovereignty, I say another push because, as many of you know, in Brussels, there have been many pushes for tax sovereignty over the past, let's say, at least 1.5 decades. Often they were not super successful, and you see on the next slide what we would say was one of the biggest reasons, because they were often presenting themselves as rather protectionist movement, arguing for certain things that you could interpret as isolation, and so on and so on. So they were often kind of dying a very fast death. We think, however, and this we are constantly underlining in our paper, that now it's really the time to make another attempt to push a tax sovereignty debate again that is not based on protectionism, on a similar internal policies, but really developing, especially when you are taking all those geopolitical circumstances and developments into account, a real European approach, a European strategy to digitalization. One that you see here on the right side is based on values, that is rights-driven, that is human-centric, and so on. This we call, and thanks for going already to the next slide, this we call in our paper the European way. Many people that are seeing this list or the infographic in our paper will basically see a lot of terms that they know from many communications of the Commission, from also many digital laws. What we did, and again, based on our feelings, that there is often incoherence and different digital policy initiatives not really well streamlined, which is why we basically made a very, very lengthy reading of many policy papers, especially things like, again, the Digital Decade program, the Declaration for Digital Rights and Freedoms, the data strategy, the AI strategy, and so on and so on. And kind of we're looking which terms, which concepts are heavily used here and there, but missing then again in other pieces, and kind of bringing them together. We were also checking what is happening in standardization, what academia is writing about, what is special for the European Union, what puts us apart from the Chinese way to digitalize, from the US way to digitalize, and so on. Our 6 key principles were, to go very quickly over it, that the European Union should have a kind of principled governance approach. So should really fight for their rights. It should not happen what you hear sometimes, that the European Union likes to regulate but doesn't or is not interested in enforcing, that we take really care about the resilience of our critical infrastructure and trying to reduce very sensitive dependencies or critical dependencies. Then 3 things where we really find here the European Union could build a strong commercial brand about it, digital made in the EU, championing interoperability, championing sustainability, but also championing trustworthiness, a term that you know, for example, from the AI Act, because all those things you can find worldwide in many regions, but we would claim that the European Union can say that we are in particular strong on it, and that we should be much more confident in selling, for example, our high privacy standards. And the last point was that we felt the European Union should take much more into account that we have a decentralized digital economy strongly based on SMEs, and therefore probably much better in addressing or creating niche products, niche services, instead of competing with US big tech when it comes to general technologies or off-the-shelf products and services. So again, as I said, we as collective of authors were really thinking with such an overall digital vision based on principles. One big step is being done or performed, but there are two more that Gautam will now talk about. The first one is the European tech stack, and the second one is a list of reforms. And just to give you one last example, Airbus, the Financial Times was presenting about our report and kind of picked up this example of something that we wanted to push. Yes, we use the Airbus example, but it's basically one of many strategies that should be used based on our overall vision. And Gautam will explain how this Airbus example also fits in the larger tech stack.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes, perfect. So as Kai mentioned, there are two real key takeaways of this report. One is that we need to look at technologies as a whole. So we need to figure out which parts of the stack connect with each other. So it's important, of course, to have cloud. It's important to have platforms, payments, identity. But all of that is fundamentally based on whether you have data centers, whether you have the right amount of chips, whether you have energy, water, etc. So the idea here is twofold. One is to sort of illustrate what the connections are in this stack and to see where the dependencies are at each layer. And the other point is to really take all of our policies, all the 105 laws that we have, and then put them through the 6 principles that Kai just mentioned, and then figure out at each layer of the stack, are we actually delivering? Are we actually able to reach those policy outcomes? And having this level of granularity actually allows us as Europeans to avoid the trap of sort of throwing the baby with the bathwater, and that's the main sort of message that we're trying to bring. The second, which is also very important for all of the 6 reforms, we have a lot of reforms. I'm not going to go into details for the report. We don't have time. But broadly speaking, for the 6 reforms, we have digital infrastructure, we have good governance, which includes rehauling the regulatory scrutiny board, for example, or increasing the Commission's power on technology issues. But we also have recommendations on the digital single market, on the energy supply situation, on geopolitics, and this is sort of the focus of this event. How will Europe look outward and not just inward with the discussions we're having on sovereignty? Because often we forget that we might think we can do everything. We might think we have all the capabilities, but that's not necessarily reflected in reality. So it's really important to be open, to have external partnerships as the main sort of guiding light, if you will, to all of our policy approaches. Just very quickly, so for infrastructure, having a coherent digital industrial policy, having the right funding in place. We're going to talk about funding on the panel. And then, of course, having clear policies on dual use tech and defense readiness. We also want to improve the single market. So all of the business growth programs that are being proposed, both in the Draghi report, but also on the Commission's list of things to do. Also leveraging public procurement. Here we are saying we need to have incentives, not sort of restrictions in terms of what providers can use. And we need to create market incentives to allow for the demand for European providers, for example. Also a few recommendations on competition policy, which we won't go into details on. On geopolitics, I think the most important thing here is to view the changing geopolitics and sort of react to it in the right way. So are we going to go down the route of having trusted third country partnerships for critical tech, for example? And then, of course, making sure that global governance is a core part of the Council's day-to-day work. That's one of the core recommendations as well. On governance, an independent digital enforcement agency. This is an old idea that keeps coming up, but it's worth checking out. On energy supply, having a joint electricity market is very, very important, and also making sure that our digital decade targets are reflecting our energy needs and our energy-intensive sectors. And then finally, there's reforms on skills and talent. there's this big number, 20 million by 2030. We are halfway there, and it's 2025. The question then is, what else can we do? First of all, we need to figure out how to get third country ICT professionals easily into the single market. We also need to nurture homegrown talent, and we need to make sure that our citizens are ready for the digital transformation. And so we have very specific recommendations on each of those. You can read more here. And with that, let me please introduce Chloe back and of course, the panelists for the discussion to follow.
Thanks, Gautam. And can I invite our panelists to join us on the stage? And yeah. Thank you. Yeah, please join where I think maybe we could do man, woman, rather than having, you don't mind. Well, thanks to Kai and to Gautam for that presentation of the findings of the report. So as we have quite a packed schedule, I'm going to jump right in. So Thibaut, I imagine you've had a very busy few months since the beginning of this commission, and it's clear that you haven't been sleeping on the job. So there are many recommendations in here that are relevant to your role in DG Connect. Could you maybe give your reactions to the report and maybe discuss a little bit how you are already working on some of these things and where you plan to kind of move forward with new projects, new initiatives in the coming months in response to some of the recent discussions that have been happening in Brussels around digital sovereignty in the stack. Thanks. I'm sorry, yes, we should spread out a bit more.
I think it should work. Thank you for inviting me, and good morning, everyone, including colleagues online. Indeed, now I'm in my role in charge of future networks in the European Commission. I'm dealing to a large extent also with the issue how we can improve European tech sovereignty. And I would say three key points on the proposal. I mean, first, I think it's a great report. I really enjoyed reading it. I found it was also looking at a quite holistic element in terms of how we are trying to work around not only dependencies, but actually making sure that Europe develop its own vision for the digital transformation. And to that extent, I would actually argue that if you take a bit of a historical perspective almost, if you look at how Europe has developed its policies in the past 10 years, in fact, there is already a European way to the digital transformation, and that has been spelled out to a large extent in the Digital Decade policy program. If you read this text, you will see that it starts with Article 2, defining actually what the European angle is to this digital transformation. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, it is grounded on values to a large extent. And there, sometimes we forget about it, but we've even published this declaration on digital rights and principles, which very much, I would say, summarizes where Europe stands in terms of what the technology is supposed to deliver, how we see issues like cohesion within our society as a result of technology, and how we try also to make sure that cybersecurity, for instance, is at the heart of our policies. And this is maybe one angle, and that would be my second point that I missed maybe in the description, which is the security angle, because this is a new feature, and I think that now we have with Henna Virkkunen, an executive vice president, which is not only in charge of tech sovereignty, it's actually in a portfolio title, but also in charge of security and democracy. And I think this is not by coincidence. Because in a way, I think that today the European Commission has produced a lot of legislation that were probably more targeting these rights, these values, this European approach in terms of defining, I would say, benefits for citizens and consumers. But today we have to face also the situation that digital technologies are also impacted by security risks. And I think this is really a new feature. Our expectation is that the next budget will also have a large part of dual-use technologies, and maybe actually it is an opportunity also for funding digital. But I would say that this is also something important to underline, that you cannot look at technology in isolation from these security elements. And I think this is giving also a stronger angle to cybersecurity considerations, which also in a way leads to sovereignty, because it's also about making your infrastructures resilient, making sure that you have enough technology resources, access to materials, so that you can, in a way, from almost a defense and military perspective, be ready to face adversity in that context. And the third point I would make is that indeed we have been active on the legislative front, but not only. And I think that now we are rolling out, I would say, an agenda to reinforce our capabilities in the EU. Nothing new in a sense, because we have these 2030 targets that were developed, but I think that they may be refined and revised next year. It's based on this compass we've defined with 4 pillars, skills, digital infrastructures, transformation of business, and transformation of government. I think this is still valid today as a framework. But if you look at the focal points of attention, it is really very much about building a kind of European offer in some markets, but also reinforcing competitiveness overall through simplification and making sure that the legislation is, yes, there to deliver the European model, so to say, but not to impede innovation and growth to the extent that we can simplify or even eliminate, where appropriate, some legislation that is not necessary. And I think that's the new feature today. I think it's not just about consolidating the implementation of the digital rulebook that we developed, but it's also to activate it so that it becomes a tool for competitiveness. And in that respect, we should also underline the programs that we have that will contribute to this. I mean, you mentioned semiconductors, and I think the CHIPS Act is delivering, maybe not as fast as we were hoping. So I think realistically, we will probably not reach the 20% market share target that is assigned in this sector, but there we are preparing also a CHIPS 2 Act. And at the same time, you've already had 100 billion euros investment in the production of chips and the development of very advanced chips. So to that extent, I think that it is not easy, but things are progressing. And I think that there is consensus on the need to have also capabilities in the EU. I would quote 2 or 3 more areas where we are advancing. One is on the AI. I think this is really, I would say, the front line of our efforts right now. The AI Continent Action Plan, I think, is quite interesting because it is a kind of unifying transformative technology. And the AI factories as well, are starting to deliver. We have 13 such AI factories that are built around supercomputers and that offer really computing power to AI development. And now the gigafactories that were announced a few months ago, we just closed a few days back the call for expression of interest. We had much more interest than we anticipated. There were more than 60 applicants to participate in this AI gigafactory. So something is happening here around computing power. And this is certainly an area where we hope we can not only catch up, but actually advance in a number of areas. And then as part of this, the Cloud and AI Development Act, which is actually one of my projects, is an area where we believe we can also have an impact in terms of consolidating data centers, increasing capacity, but also looking at the service layer. So what is the European offer in that space? And how can we also build on open source software as an alternative, sometimes to existing proprietary solutions, very often coming from outside of Europe. So it is about consolidating efforts. It's about building a marketplace and transparency about these European solutions. And it is also about making sure that we buy European. And I think that's something that is a new feature. It's not about protectionism, but it's about actually giving a chance and also considering seriously technology from Europe, because if you look at it, actually, it's very good. And we should not shy away from trying to look at maybe not just the hyperscalers, but also smaller companies that are doing a very good job and that can also scale up in Europe through public procurement, but also through purchasing from large accounts. And to conclude, I would just say that in addition to the cloud and AI, now we are finalizing plans for indeed the Cybersecurity Act. As I said, that's the second comment I was making, but also the data union, which will be also a way to make sure that data is available, but also in a way that is simple and effective. So in essence, it's not a simple journey. I think that you're right to say that this has been discussed already for some time. But what I can see from my position is that there is now a clear momentum to take this issue very seriously. And I think from governments that previously were maybe more relaxed about just buying from especially the US, I think there is also a perception that this is not sustainable. And we need at least to have capabilities made in Europe if we want on the long run to maintain our competitiveness.
Thank you very much, Thibault. I think there's a lot to chew on there, but I guess given that we're moving the conversation to focus on the international dimension specifically now, I guess one of the big questions will be around, well, already one of the big questions around the digital decade was kind of that it didn't have so many clear targets and financing attached. And Laure will shortly speak a little bit on the financing dimension, because I think this is one of the really big questions. But alongside that, I guess, at the same time, the EU has been advancing on the international dimension with the new international digital strategy that David was one of the leads on. I guess it would be interesting to talk a little bit about how you see the international dimension fitting in with this conversation about digital sovereignty, around strengthening European technologies and around the European tech offer externally, before we then dive into kind of maybe a bit more on the financing and the tools as well. Sorry, David Ringrose from the EAS, for anyone who doesn't know already.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Chloe. And it's great to discuss this subject here, I think. And thanks for the report, Gautam and Kai. I think it was really, it's always good when there's a big complicated environment and you crunch it down into a good sort of grille de lecture, as we say, a good sort of analytical framework, so we can understand what it is that we need to look at, what we need to focus on, and so on. And I think this, the 6, passing the 105 through the 6 at the end to see where we're working is a really good approach. I think the interesting thing about the report as well, there's one specific geopolitical recommendation out of the 6, but in all of these things, they have implications for how we relate to the outside world. And for me, so we've looking at it, of course, I'm thinking about, okay, what did we forget in our international strategy? Is there something we could have put better? But I think, for me, an important point I'd like to make is about partnerships as learning opportunities. Because we talk, this is one of the central themes of this international strategy that the ES and the Commission work closely together on. So not just colleagues in Connect, but also DG INPA, NIR, NS, MENA, RTD, Trade, and everybody. So this is a kind of a whole of EU approach across here. But partnerships is a really key part of that, not just because of the digital part, but obviously in terms of all of our foreign policy right now in the EU, partnerships is the thing that we're trying to deliver across the board, which is why we have more summits this year than we've ever had, which is why there's so much push to conclude trade agreements, digital trade agreements, digital partnerships, and so on, because obviously what we want to do in the EU is to show that the EU is a reliable, predictable, and consistent partner for the rest of the world. And I think that's something that people are responding to, judging by the amount of cooperation we're having. And I think these partnerships are not just, you know, a way for us to get what we want, but I think a really important part of this internal external axis, because of course internal external doesn't just mean acting in the outside world in the same ways as you do, but also learning from what's happening in the outside world and adjusting, I think. And the important thing about sort of these ministerial level partnerships is that we then have conversations with partners that are not just about, you know, how do we cooperate in research programs, how do this, but how do we figure out that we're going in the same direction. If we talk about Japan, for example, when we started talking at the senior level with Japan about digital issues, Japan was already very well advanced on its economic security agenda. They had a Minister for Economic Security. This was highlighted at the Prime Minister's office and so on. And they were bringing together trade and digital and all this type of thing. And then now, of course, economic security is a key part of what we're doing. When the Trade and Technology Council with the US, of course, was a very deep learning opportunity. Lots of parts of the administration talking to each other, not just about the why, but about the how, and so on. If we think about the partnership that we had with India, a lot of time on digital public infrastructure and so on, and you see there's a lot of that in our strategy. Talking with Canada about very much about the shared values-based approach to what we're doing, citizen participation and so on. So I think in the sort of the government to government part, these partnerships offer us a real opportunity to figure out how we can learn from all of our partners and come together like that. Another aspect, if you look at the way Global Gateway has changed, the way that we are developing our partnerships as well. We're moving from we in Brussels invent a project, then we tender it and someone implements it, to we're kind of inverting the paradigm, if you like, and not just asking a piece of the bureaucracy in one of our partner countries that is responsible for cooperation to come up with 3 priorities, but we're talking to companies and saying, okay, what is actually happening there? What works, what doesn't? Where do you need some support? What did you plan to do, but you didn't do it because, I don't know, there was some part of the regulatory framework didn't work, or there were some issues with the way the government processes work or procurement or something. What about those things? What if we talked about those? So maybe we could bring it back, because we as the EU, we can help with those issues and so on. So it's a very different way of having our partnership with the private sector, and I think the tech offer that's in there, it's very much about changing the way that we relate with the private sector. I remember in Japan when we had our first discussion, government to government, with private sector stakeholders in the room. That wasn't something that our partners were used to. But we said, look, this is the way we do things. Let's do this together. So I think there's a lot of learning from these partnerships, and Global Gateway is about trying to do that, trying to listen to all of our stakeholders in the partner countries. And for the ES, of course, one of the things that we're focused on is the security and defense part. And I think in the strategy, we spent a lot of time trying to ensure that we could, we're talking about competitiveness, about security and defense and how all that fits together and so on, because of course, the dual use reference that Thibault made is really important. NATO just agreed 5%. A lot of that money is going to be going into dual use sectors, right? It's going to go into enabling frameworks. There's a good article from Helsing in The Economist this morning. They're calling it the Manhattan Project and so on. So we want to make sure, obviously, that, you know, we've got 2 big challenges in Europe, the security challenge and the digital sector challenge. And can we figure out how to deal with both of these together if there's a lot of investment, a lot of innovation coming in this dual use sector as well. So if you look at the security and defense partnerships that we've concluded over the past few years, at the beginning there was some talk about cybersecurity and so on. We look in the UK security and defense partnership, there's a whole part about AI as well. So we need to make sure that we're doing this in a joined up way. So I think this whole partnership thing, I think it's a big change, but it's the only way that we as the EU see for dealing with all of these things, because we don't think we can deal with all of this together. We need to figure out who our partners are, who we can work with, and who we can proceed on this values-based journey together.
Thank you, David. I guess I might go to Laure Blanchard-Brunac online next, if that's fine with everyone. But because I do think that in terms of what you've just spoken about, one of the big topics for the next couple of years is really going to be around the funding, whether it's on security, whether it's on digital, the question of the next multi-annual financial framework, but also of how there will also be the question of member states coming together. If we're to have an Airbus moment again, that is going to happen. That's going to be industry and member states also. But in the coming weeks, we're already expecting the first proposals from the Commission in terms of the multi-annual financial framework. And I think one of the most interesting dimensions there is also going to be the new competitiveness fund, which to a large extent will determine how far we can go with some of the ambitions that you've laid out, Thibault. And then there is the question in terms of partnerships of whether the instruments will be fit for purpose, because a big issue with the Global Gateway so far that we've looked at quite a bit at ECDPM is that it didn't really have a toolkit ready-made when it was announced, and that there has been a lot of work over the past few years to try and figure out what is the toolkit to actually deliver on these grand ambitions in terms of international investment in partner countries. So one of the interesting aspects of the rearm discussion recently has been that there is a third of that which is designated for that allows for international partners to be involved in the procurement. And as these discussions about Buy European move forward, I think there is this question about to what extent the international dimension is also integrated, and the potential for trusted digital partnerships and for procuring together with third countries. So Laure is an associated expert here with ECDPM, as well as being a member of the Invest EU Investment Committee. And she's joining us from Paris today. So Laure, you're following these debates closely. Could you come in a little bit more on this?
Thank you, Chloe. Do you hear me well? Good. Okay, thank you. And sorry I couldn't join you in person, but I'm glad to follow the discussion anyway online. It's a great paper, and I will also refer to it in my comments, because there are some really interesting ideas there. Also in view of the MFF discussion that will start from July onwards that Chloe mentioned. So first of all, one thing which is really important when we talk of investment in the digital sector is the reference to the single market and the competition policy that actually was made in the report. But if the question is why don't we have an Airbus in the digital sector, I think the answer is really because of the competition policy that was applied for many reasons. But the first and foremost reason was really to protect the consumers in Europe. So I think to me, the big difference between Airbus and telecom operators in Europe is that they are integrated businesses, and they have to serve consumers, and as a consumer being sometimes hijacked by either a telecom operator in a dominant position or another company in a dominant position, I can only vouch for that approach to competition policy. And when you look at what has been going on at the EU level, is that it's very obvious that there's been much more stress in the telecom sector on the competition policy and making sure consumers have access and reasonable pricing of digital services. And there has been far less focus on investment. And I will give you an example on that is when I worked on the Connecting Europe facility and then the Juncker Plan FC. Each time for 6 months, we had inside the Commission the DG Comp blocking the delivery of the program, and that was mainly, I mean, one of the points of disagreement was really on how we apply what is the state aid situation when it comes to CEF or FC financing broadband projects. And so that's not nothing, because FC was the program before InvestEU, and some of you might recall that with 20 billion euro, we managed to achieve 500 billion euro of mobilized investments. So this is basically the premise of what the European Competitiveness Fund should be hopefully soon. So that first, there is really a need to rejig the competition policy if we want much more focus on investment. And obviously, it has to be done carefully. As I said, you know, the telcos, the digital operators, a lot in the system are facing consumers. So there's still a question mark on what consumers get out of all this. And then my second point is on the size of the investment gap and the lack of scale in Europe, which has a massive implication when it comes to the digital sector. So just to give you an idea with numbers, according to the World Economic Forum, when we look at mobile operators in Europe, they are much smaller than in the US and China. To give you an idea, an average mobile operator in Europe, it's 5 million subscribers. In the US, this is 107 million subscribers. In China, this is 460 million subscribers. So whoever in the room looked at a business plan to roll out a network, whether that's for the digital, but also for energy or other network-based business model, you very well know how much scale matters. And I would add, it will only get worse with AI. And the reason it will get worse with AI is that on top of the need to scale capital and energy to make your network rollout interesting, or the infrastructure rollout interesting, the concentration of data will determine who will be the next winner in terms of AI. So the places where you will have most data, and I'm thinking especially now the Silicon Valley, will be the ones that will train their AI even more quickly than the others. So there's really this question of scale in the digital sector is absolutely key. And my personal view is that it's been clearly overlooked when we designed the previous policies and regulations, how important that is for telecom, but also Ericsson and Nokia and the providers of infrastructure at all level of the stack that you presented, how much scale matter. And in front of this scale and this investment gap, so the investment gap announced by the Commission for the Digital Decade targets, it's 174 billion euro. To give you an idea on what, for example, InvestEU can do, overall InvestEU, we have, the target is 372 billion euro of investment mobilized, and that's all sectors included, and digital is only a very small share of that. And another comparison is what EIB recently announced, the European Investment Bank announced, I think, a couple of days ago, that they will increase their ceiling of financing to 100 billion euro a year in 2025. So the role of EIB, all sectors included in this, with very investment incentive sectors like energy or transport, it's 100 billion a year as a record. It's the highest they can do. So there are some obviously strong reaction from the Commission, which are really welcome, and we will see how the next the MFF proposals that are coming out on 16th of July and 23rd of July will play out. But there are premises of the fact that the EU has really taken the size of the issue seriously. The one is, for example, there's been a release of the first European startup and scale-up strategy a few weeks ago. It's the first time, and basically the reason there was no scale-up strategy.
Sorry, 1 minute, Laure.
Yes. the scale-up strategy before was not released, it's mostly because of this competition policy issue I just mentioned. And then the competitiveness fund will come out as part of the MFF proposals. And for digital, the crucial part will be to see how we can mobilize institutional investors thanks to this fund. Now I will finish with the question of international partnerships. I won't repeat what David said. I fully agree. This is absolutely massive. And here, what I find interesting in the report is what you said about the screening of friendly countries. And there's been an example of that under the foreign direct investment screening, for example. But there's really some homework to be done that we are actually doing on our side in ECDPM. We have a project where we are looking at how to design better financial tools under a global gateway, and notably for private sector, but including digital sector. And some questions we have there is how we define European interest, and within there also how we define the countries the EU can partner with to ensure its strategic autonomy and strong international partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laure. I think, yeah, a lot of these conversations without actually touching on the question of how to pay for them can tend to go in circles as well. And I think now turning it maybe back to the international strategy specifically, in the next few days, Denmark is taking over the presidency of the EU, of the Council, and Denmark has for a long time been really one of the advocates of an open strategic autonomy. How does Denmark plan to take forward the international digital approach in the coming months, and maybe particularly this the international tech offer? It would be interesting to hear a little bit more from you on that, Anne.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. If I go back to and react to the report, first of all, I want to share 3 reflections on what I think needs to happen next. First of all, as everyone has said, we need to strengthen our competitiveness but remain open. Second of all, we need member states engaged to strengthen the link between digital policy and foreign policy. And third of all, we need to focus on where the EU can lead and not pretend that we can lead on everything. So on the first one, on strengthening our competitiveness but remaining open, I think the report gets many things right. The EU needs to invest in key areas and reduce dependencies, but we need to stay open. So if Eurostack is about building a strong digital industry, then that makes a lot of sense. But if it's about closing off from global partners or creating purely domestic alternatives, then that's dangerous. Then we must be cautious. And I think this brings me to my second point. We need member states engaged. Of course, I come from the council perspective, so I have to say that. But we need to really strengthen this link between digital policy and foreign policy, but also security, as both Thibaut and David mentioned. And I think the international digital strategy points to the fact that we need to really work together with other regions, with partners, to be able to shape global standards and develop infrastructure. But yeah, as I said, the strategy will only work if member states take it seriously. So we can't have a stronger digital Europe if member states are pulling in different directions. So from the Danish perspective, we've for a long time established a closer link between digital policy and foreign policy. We were the first to establish a tech ambassador in 2017. And I'm also a part of that office. And the point is really to engage directly with the industry and play an active role in multilateral negotiations on digital issues. And I think this is an example of how member states can be proactive and really contribute as Europe and play along as Team Europe abroad on digital issues. Yeah. Concerning my third point, we need to focus on where Europe can lead. I think I must admit I really appreciate how the report remains pragmatic on this. It doesn't pretend that we can or should rebuild the entire tech ecosystem here in Europe. Instead, it suggests that we need to focus on where Europe can lead, and about building alternatives and partnering internationally where it makes sense. And I think this is the kind of realistic thinking that we need. So a final point from my side, I think the report reminds us that control over tech is really control over our future. And it doesn't mean doing everything alone. It means having a seat at the table and knowing what's inside the tools that we use, and being able to set the terms and not just accept them. And this is something that we will be working on during the Danish presidency to really carry forward this strategy within council and also outside. So thank you very much.
Well, we look forward to following in the months ahead. Mathilde, coming from the perspective of one of the handful of major European companies in the digital sector, how do you think the EU can balance between this conversation about more domestic tech sovereignty and resilience on the one hand, and maintaining openness and competitiveness on the other hand?
I don't see that as exclusive at all. I don't think it's necessarily a balance to be found in that sense. So hi, Matilda. I work in the geopolitics and government relations team of Nokia. My main scope of focus looks at digital economic diplomacy, but I will also bring in a bit more of a Europe perspective. But I think what's been already discussed, this balance indeed between, whenever we think about competitiveness, it's not just a question of competitiveness of companies within the EU, and of course all the discussions around integrating the digital single market, around building up the scale. I think Laura already mentioned it quite significantly, so I won't go into that detail. But one dimension I'd like to bring as well is looking at how our ability to compete abroad also then has an impact into our ability to then keep on investing into R&D here. Most of our workforce in Europe is focusing on R&D, and this is how we would like to keep it. But how do we then have this ability when our competition globally, on a global scale, is quite hindered? And I think the recommendations in the report in that sense are, we would basically commend most of them. I think it's, though, on the Airbus example, one needs probably to remember, but that it's not necessarily enough in the sense of the network provider perspective. We're already a very, very integrated market where you only have a handful of players, literally globally. Luckily, 2 of them in Europe, ourselves included. But having that integration doesn't mean that we're going to then be able to lead the world, and like the competition is out there is extremely fierce. And I think indeed this discussion for us really on where the money is going to go in the next MFF. Already now we can't just wait for the next MFF, but already now how to allocate the money, how to think about our procurement rules, indeed internally and also externally, I think is absolutely crucial, because other players, we're not necessarily going to be calling for European money only to European players, in the sense that most of the time we just want to be able to compete fairly. And still in Europe, that's not always the case, and specifically outside of Europe, that's not that's not always the case either. And so how, at least on the things where we can control, because for example, for trade and competition in third markets, that's not a lot that either the member states or the EU can do, but at least on the things we can control. So on the way the European development finance institutions spend their money, we understand that, you know, tied and untied aid is a tricky topic, but at the same time, there is a notion of how do we do development indeed in partnerships with partner companies also and partner institutions in our partner countries. And that's for us is very important. So how do we end up in a situation where basically European taxpayers' money is essentially being used, to serve the wider also European policy objectives, and that we're not naive in the way that other international partners do their international partnerships, in the sense that, trust me, we do not have access to the procurement that some of the, let's say, American or Chinese or Japanese are putting out there. So we need to be mindful of that. We're calling for a form of pragmatism when it comes to that. And indeed, when you look at the next MFF, obviously we're very keen on seeing what the competitiveness fund really will be about. We would also call, and I will go back to your point on Global Gateway and the fitness of the instruments. I think c'est là que le bas blesse. Really, that's what's been hurting a lot when we've been trying to engage, and I'm representing here as well the digital subgroup of the business advisory group of Global Gateway, and that's really where most of our work has been on identifying the gaps in the European toolbox. And what we really try to call is for both basically those international partnerships funds, the way that the instruments are made that are really more, faster to be leveraged and can really be deployed, or for example, blending or the guarantees that are available. But indeed, how do we think competitiveness also with an external dimension? And I think this is really where you would then go a bit aside on this dilemma between tied and untied aid and so on, where you could actually agree that, yeah, sure, Europe tries to also support its champions, its companies in their competitiveness abroad, and that could be something. And there's already a lot to be, I think, learned from Connect and the Connecting Europe facility. There's a bit of there are already sort of grant programs available where those large network deployments really fit European policy objectives within Europe, and to connect, let's say, Europe to its territories abroad. But how do we do that also internationally? And that's something that we would really like to bring into the picture. So moving forward, I think also on the final point on the bringing the security, what Thibault was mentioning earlier. So really bringing in the security, looking at dual use, absolutely. How do we think also all those investments that are going to go into defense? Do you want to use all these investments also to actually drive critical technologies deployments? I mean, not only for like military purposes, but literally for also civilian purposes. So we're very keen on the discussions that are going into that, and absolutely on the point of Laure earlier on AI will only make, let's say, things as big as they are now. If you want to invest into AI, but you don't have your networking capabilities between all your data centers, if you don't build all of that, then we're not going to get anywhere. So that's absolutely crucial. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mathilde. So I could follow up with plenty of other questions, but are there people in the room who would like to ask questions, or indeed online? For those online, maybe add your questions in the chat, whereas for those in the room, you can just simply raise your hand. We actually have already a question online, and then I see we have a question in the room as well. So maybe I'll go with the one online right now. So Pat McCarthy asks, what can we learn from Airbus and automotive leadership to leverage a home market, but also global trade? How can we expect to be trusted for our global tech if we challenge international players like the hyperscalers in the US? I think the key priority missing is venture capital for tech that is friendly to avoid tech moving to the US. So that's probably one for Mathilde and Laure in particular. Laure, would you like to come in on that point?
Yes, thank you. And I fully agree with the comment. There's a strong link between this competitiveness question abroad and the scale up, the need to support scale up. So that's why I mentioned the startup and scale up strategy, which is the first, and there's really a strong point there, which is to finance scale ups in Europe to avoid them moving to the US. Now, it's a financing tool. And I think one thing we haven't really raised, but which is really important in the report, is the stress on the single market and building further the single market in the digital sector. Because at the end of the day, we can create all financing tool we want, but the US for a digital company, it offers a 350 million euro people market with very wealthy people compared to the rest of the world. So this is why also they are moving to the US. It's not only for the capital supply, it's also because there's a question of business opportunity, which is unmatched.
You want to come in on that point also?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, I would definitely agree to Laura's points. I think on the necessity to focus on the single market specifically, I think we have a tendency to look at other markets. I mean, obviously the size of the American market, the size of the Chinese market, but if you look at indeed a fully integrated single market, well, there's a lot of appeal. And if you have what has been in the report, like if you have more focus on capital markets, on VC investments for scale-ups. If you think about how we use our instruments not only to fund fundamental research, which is absolutely essential, but how do we then go from this fundamental research to innovation which can really be developed and then be commercialized and have an appeal to be commercialized here in Europe? I think it's absolutely fundamental. So yes.
Yeah, this has been from the Draghi report, but in many, many cases since, the idea, and also in the European way, the mention of a DARPA particularly, but also the wider kind of bringing ideas to market. Franz, you wanted to come in?
Hello, my name is Franz Weizsäcker. I work for GIZ African Union based in Addis Ababa, and I would like to complement the perspectives from our partner countries. It's very big on the African agenda to talk about digital sovereignty. We acknowledge that what they mean by that tends to differ from one place to the other. But that is really a topic where we sort of sit in the same boat in Europe, being neither US and being neither China. And so I do see a large demand in our partner countries to get advisory services on digital sovereignty, be it on the economic side and be it on the telco network side and be it in the digital government side of it. So sort of Eurostack might be a bit the direction to resolve that. And on the side of the telco networks, maybe core network supplied by Nokia, and economic development is always high on the agenda. So I was wondering, how could these strategies translate into partner offerings, and taking into account that yes, maybe we need to subsidize or make the European offer on telco competitive. Maybe we can build on the concepts of the open concepts of GovStack. Digital procurement is not very sexy like digital government procurement, but it is very core important to achieve digital sovereignty in the governmental level, acknowledging that the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative has invested billions in e-government infrastructures in Africa, among others.
Would you like to take that,
Yeah.
David?
No, I think firstly, to underline the great work that GIZ is doing in Africa, and I think we couldn't do a lot of what we're doing without partnering with GIZ. I think in Africa we've come a long way, but we are, I think we're reaching the point where we really need to commit a bit more. Recently, we've cooperated with the African Union for a long time. Obviously, we do that for two reasons. One, because we want to solve the problems they're trying to solve. Secondly, of course, because it makes it, we are in favor of the African Union having a key role in making policy space across Africa. The cooperation that we're doing, for example, on the free flow of data across Africa, I think with a big project that we have with the African Union is very important, because of course our message to our African partners is that you need to do what we did in the EU in terms of removing the barriers to the flow of data across Africa if you want to scale up. And you shouldn't listen to other people who come to Africa and say data localization is the way to go, and here are a couple of here are a couple of cheap data centers and so on. That's a big scale project as part of the African Continental Free Trade Area. I think that's a really important part of the work that we're doing. Secondly, the Commission just recently signed a memorandum of understanding with Smart Africa, which I think is significant, because for a long time I think it was a bit difficult to work with the African Union and Smart Africa together, but I think they're working much better together now. Smart Africa is a great organization representing a lot of the private sector and the governments in Africa, very innovative and so on. So working with them, we're trying to see where we can make a real impact in Africa as a whole. And then I think when we look at the individual partnerships that we have, obviously the digital economy package that we concluded with Nigeria a while ago is the kind of model that we're trying to look at in terms of combining investment in infrastructure with work in the enabling framework and so on. The big EIB package there, but also working on things, e-government and so on, together with the Estonian e-government academy and so on, to try and see how we can bring basic e-government reforms that would save the government money, bring better services and so on. I think we're working very closely with Kenya, with Tanzania as well. And when I look at the recent EU-African Union ministerial we had at the end of May, there was a lot in there about digital. There's a lot of expectation that we can do more. We're very happy that the EU-African Union summit should be taking place at the end of this year. And we're trying to see how we can use that as the springboard to doing a lot more. I think we have a lot of good projects, whether it's backbone, whether it's linking up the Bella cable to West Africa, investments in data centers in Mauritania and so on. These are a little bit, I wouldn't say ad hoc, but we need to see how these fit in. So these sort of macro level projects across Africa as a whole, and then the individual partnerships. I think this prioritization and the how do we figure out which are the ones that we can work best with as well is an important part. And we're doing that across North Africa, obviously, with all these comprehensive strategic partnerships and so on. And then finally, I think an important stimulus for more work is the IMEC corridor, which is designed to look at the possibility for economic development all the way from India through to the Gulf, through to Europe. Now, there's obviously part in the middle there where there's a lot of challenges, if you like, but for the Indians and for the Gulf, East Africa is part of the same network, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. If we look at the Sparkle cable that's going down through the Red Sea and so on, and all of the investments that are being made in transport and logistics from East Africa through the Gulf and so on, a lot of that is digital investment in ports and things like that too. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, you know, we think the work the African Union is doing, Smart Africa is doing, and so on, it's all going in the right direction. We have to see how Global Gateway can come in behind that, I guess.
Is there anyone else who wants to come in on that question? Otherwise, we have quite a few online as well. Mathilde?
Yeah, no, I can only fully agree on the idea that our partners in Africa are looking at national sovereignty, data sovereignty, and looking at how to leverage data as a national asset, and how to not do digitization for the sake of digitization, but also looking at it from a bit more of a like comprehensive social perspective. And this is really where we're trying to focus our work. And this is where we've also highlighted to them, indeed, on when you look at building your own data centers, when you look at connecting your data centers, if you don't do it in a secure and trusted way, then you're never going to reach that objective. And this is where we're trying as a partner to do that. And indeed, as part of Global Gateway, and overall as part of like Team Europe's projection abroad, I think we need to rethink a bit both on the political engagements and also on the instruments. So it's a bit, and maybe I'm not going to sound your day-to-day private sector representatives, in the sense that if you only look at it from a subsidization perspective, we're going to lose, because China always will manage to subsidize better, or the Americans also with their national procurement, etc. So what we're calling for is not only that, yeah, we want Connecting Europe facility for global projects or competitiveness, so on, etc., but we really want to look at the way procurement is done from all European plus also the member states, their DFIs. So we want to look at how from Europe we can build, for example, an export credit facility to complement what our national export credit agencies are doing, so that we can build and come in with the financial package already sort of upfront, because I think that's really what's missing at the moment. We have a very fragmented offer as Team Europe, which is fair. We are a union and with different member states, but at the moment this is really what's missing, is that whenever we come with those economic packages and so on, or whenever we come with projects, our partners are saying, sure, how do you finance it? And for us, it takes years, I will not lie. It takes years to get those things done. Our competitors manage it in a few weeks or a few months. And that's really something that we need to keep in mind, is that we need to think about our instruments, but we need to also think about the speed of delivery, because that's what our partners are asking us for.
Thanks. We have 3 questions online and I think 1 in the room. So we maybe the answers to, I'll put together the next 2 because they're both very much on the international dimension. And maybe if we can do quick answers. But the first question is, what is the current plan for the TTC between the EU and the US, and future development plans regarding partnership on some parts of the stack? And then this, which is from Claire Marie Healy, and then René van Eyck in the Netherlands asks, could the Commission expand on the EU tech business offer in the international digital strategy and how this relates to the Global Gateway? So those are 2 quite different questions, but maybe David and Anne, would you like to come in as well, perhaps?
Well, I'm not in the European Commission, so I can't respond on behalf of the Commission on the TTC. I think at the moment, you know, everybody is aware that our relations with the US, the biggest political issue we need to deal with right now is July the 9th is coming up, and we need to ensure that we get the solution that we want on the tariff issue, and that's dominating everything that we're doing. This doesn't mean that we do not continue to talk to our US colleagues on some of the issues that we were talking with before. I was recently at a conference in Stockholm, and we met with some of our colleagues in the State Department talking about trusted vendors and so on. And I think on the ground as well, there's we still share an interest in promoting secure connectivity. So, but as far as a TTC 2.0 or something is concerned, I think we need to deal with the big issues first, and continue to cooperate on working level where we can. On the other question was?
The other question is about the tech business offer,
yes.
and how this relates to the Global Gateway.
I think it says it relates to the Global Gateway. I think, you know, I think the cooperation that we have on trusted connectivity with the 2 main European companies is a very good example of how we are discussing not with people who implement contracts, but with people who have a strategic overall view. I noticed that Mathilde said that you're working on geopolitics, and I think it's an important point when we see big European companies who have people dealing specifically with geopolitics. It's relatively new, I think, but it's an important point when we talk to a lot of these big companies that we talked about. They're realizing that they can't pretend that geopolitics is for governments, but geopolitics is for companies as well. They are actors in that, and that they need people who understand all of this, what that means for the future, because I think that's, and so that's really welcome that's working. I think it's Global Gateway is, as I said, you know, we're all learning the same lessons throughout the EU on how we need to reorient in this geopolitical space, and I think the Global Gateway is part of that. The way we're working with companies, and all the lessons that we've learned from working with Mathilde, her colleagues, and with other colleagues, we're trying to bring into the rest of the digital sector in Global Gateway, because of course it's not just about 5G and connectivity, but if you look at the Pact for the Mediterranean, if you look at the Black Sea strategy and so on, we've got submarine cables, we've got data centers and so on. So we need to have, I think, a better relationship with these companies, looking at how we can learn from them in terms of where the trends are going, what we need to be doing, and so on, and seeing how we can move faster.
Mathilde, very quickly, please.
Super quickly. So I think I fully I'm in line with David 100%. I think for us, also on the question from René, for us it's also a perspective of how do we bring together basically what Global Gateway as a strategy was about, which is looking at the world from a geopolitics, where geopolitics, trade, and development sort of are trying to figure out what to do with each other, which are worlds which previously were not dealing with each other. And I think we've already come a long way, even though the road ahead is still very much longer. But then how do we bring that world with the tech diplomacy, with the digital diplomacy discussions, and how do we project ourselves as Team Europe abroad? Because to a certain extent, sure, Team Finland is very much appreciated for each, and Team Denmark and Team France and Team Germany. But I think there's also a question from our partners who are looking at, okay, Team Europe, what is it about? And I think if not only our EU delegations, but also our member state embassies abroad would also be talking sort of a unified way in terms of this is what Team Europe can offer. And sure, as part of Team Finland, I can do this, but I also understand that Team Estonia can do this and that. And as European, we can build together with you sort of a stronger integrated offer. This is really what would be super beneficial and what our partners are also asking for us. So I think they're absolutely linked.
Yeah, well, we'll be doing lots and lots of work on that in the coming months. We have one question in the room, and then I'll go to the last question online. Please.
Hi, Carl Heinemann, UK mission to the EU. First of all, I just wanted to quickly say I think the International Digital Strategy that's just come out is a very interesting product, an interesting idea about sort of creating a network of like-minded countries that can sort of work together on tech issues and coordinate. I think that's really good. The sort of idea of buy European preference and procurement came up a few times, and I was just interested in perspectives on that, because I think it's quite important to get that right and sort of make it work with that International Digital Strategy as well. WTO issues perhaps aside, but I think there are risks if you get it wrong that you sort of discourage foreign bidders that will have better and cheaper products, and at the same time you're sort of actually removing incentives for your European companies to be innovative and compete globally if they've sort of got guaranteed contracts in the EU. So interested in perspectives on that, and sort of what you can do to reassure that countries like the UK that it's going in the right direction. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the point about like-minded partners, I mean, we work with like-minded partners on a daily basis. A lot of the work we do in the ES is in the multilateral area, so it's in New York and Geneva and so on, where we're working with the UK. The UK has a great, very strong presence in Geneva at the ITU and so on, and we work very smoothly. We've done so. One of the like-minded partners we work with very closely has become a little more unpredictable recently, but we still, but of course, the point is that like-minded partners is not enough, and the real work needs to take place in the gray areas where everybody's a bit more transactional, where we need to figure out, okay, what are we prepared to compromise on and so on. And I think in the multilateral area, that's something we as the EU really focus on, is try to be the constructive bridge builder to show that multilateralism delivers. And those lessons about working with like-minded partners, we're bringing into this space as well, because we have these digital partnerships with Japan, with Korea, with Singapore, with Canada. Maybe we'll have some others in the future with other partners and so on. But it's great if we're talking semiconductors and 5G and quantum with one, and then again with the other, then again with the other. But a lot of these issues we need to talk together because we can come up with better solutions. We're already looking at sort of triangular cooperation. We have research projects and things like this. So I think the idea behind this network is to say, look, we can, as Europe, we can go beyond simply just having a series of bilateral things, looking at the convening power of the EU to bring together all of these people who agree with each other on the basic principles is probably something we should do. And the echoes we get from our partners is this is something that they think is useful. I mean, I think As far as the UK specifically is concerned, you just have to look at the process leading up to the Security and Defence Partnership, the discussion about UK participation in programs and so on. And it's a perfect, we start from the point that EU programs are designed for the EU, and that if you're going to participate, there are obligations for participation, and we have to discuss what those obligations are.
Thanks, David. Before turning to Laure, raise your hand. Maybe I'll add in the last question, because I think you might be one of the best places to respond with. So many of the reforms spelled out in the European Way document, as well as in the to develop the Eurostat overall, have to do with deepening the single market in the EU integration on non-digital topics, but on enablers like energy, saving investments, with public procurement. What is the outlook, receptiveness, and willingness of the member states to implement these reforms? So maybe Laure, on these two questions. And then maybe
Sorry, Chloe, I'm sorry, but I can't hear you anymore.
Oh, sorry. Did you hear the question?
I'm not sure.
Sorry. So the question was really about the enablers sorry to everyone online. So the question was around the enablers such as energy, saving and investments union, public procurement, which are all about basically deeper integration of the single market. And what is the outlook, receptiveness, and willingness to implement these reforms? So maybe if you have anything to say on that also.
Absolutely. I think, well, first, it's a great question, because that's actually reflects the strong added value of the report on that front. The fact that I think it's the first time I see a report really on digital, but with the view that it should be integrated to a much broader policy framework. And when you look at the digital compacts and compare to the recommendation that were made in the report, you can see that it's basically the digital compass with geopolitics, with governance, with the very bold reference to reforming the regulatory board, etc. So that is a really strong output from the report. Now, I think on how much the member states are willing to implement these reforms, well, it varies very much from one aspect to another. I would say on the Savings and Investment Union, unfortunately, it's going to be slow. For those who have looked at the proposal, you will see that it's a lot of what has not been agreed before, just proposed again and again. So there will be some friction there. Now, on public procurement, it's strongly related to the competitiveness question, and Mathilde raised the fact that procurement rules have to be rigid for the EU companies to remain competitive. And one thing I would add on the enablers list, which is not in the report, but which is really crucial to the digital sector, is all the efforts the member states are now doing on defense. And also related to the earlier question on European interest. If you look at the definition we have so far of what are European interests in the recent EU regulations or proposals, one of the strongest one is with the CEF program, and a lot of this defense investments can be dual use. So it will certainly be for a large part digital. So I think it will. We won't have all the enablers ready, that's for sure. There will be some falling between the cracks, but I think there are some advancements we haven't seen, especially on defense, for example, for many years that are happening right now.
Thank you, Laure. I'm going to hand over to Gautam for some last words, and then we'll try and let you go. Not too late.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for joining us. I think this was very useful, not just for everyone watching and listening, but also for the writers of this report, because it gives us some more ideas to reflect on, and also we get to know how it's being received. And it's really heartening to see, for example, that the Commission is thinking about the stack approach, not necessarily Eurostack per se, but just the idea of looking at things in a holistic way and to see how dependencies work. I think that's really positive. And then the fact that, you know, we want to ensure that Europe is open for business, but also as sort of the United States retreats in the world, this is a really good opportunity for Europe to sort of come to the fore, so to speak, and take global leadership. And so I think from those perspectives, the digital discussions are really relevant. So I want to say thank you again. Thank you, Chloe, for the moderation, and to all of our panelists here. Thanks a lot. Take care.